Hey, welcome back to another episode of A Warrior's Spirit, where we let the inner warrior shine in their light. Today, I have the honor of talking with Bobby Jones. I've known Bobby for a couple years now. Bobby has lived a roller coaster life from the depths of hell to the mountaintops and anywhere in between. And I think he's a great guy with a good soul, and I'm honored to have him here. So, Bobby, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, it's my pleasure, man. I appreciate that intro too. But it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
I know part of your story only because I've known you for a couple years now. Heard it several times, but do you mind if we start kind of at the beginning of your journey and pop through it?
Yeah, sure, sure. You want like the abbreviated version, like
Well, I think there's some depth to your story that you don't share, so I'm gonna
okay,
guide you into those areas. But
nice.
let's start at the beginning so that the people can get a background. You weren't raised in what I would consider a wealthy environment, would you?
No, no, not at all. But it is interesting because like at the time, and I mention this often, like at the time you just don't know. So like I want to say like looking back on paper, it was a very unordinary, unusual childhood. But at the time you don't know that. So it seems so ordinary to you. So grew up, super poor. We lived in a single wide trailer in Magnolia, Delaware, which is about 30 minutes from where we are right now here in Dover. And both my parents, they had struggled on and off with addictions, and my mother more than my father, but my father just, got into it just as much at later times. And then what was kind of the roller coaster for us as kids was when the state intervened and put me and my sister into some foster homes. So that was challenging. You're told your whole childhood, like, don't go with strangers, don't talk to strangers. And then, like, one day strangers show up and, like, you're coming with us, don't listen to them. I'm like, wait, what? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
makes it
so that was,
challenging. But you and your sister, did you go to the same foster home or did you get separated?
so we did end up getting separated, unfortunately, but we did start out in the same foster home. And I actually have an older brother too, but by that point, my grandparents decided to bring him in and raised him at their home. And this is my brother is a half brother, but we share the same mother, and those grandparents were also her parents. So they were our maternal grandparents that we shared, and they took him in, and then me and my sister went into foster care. We moved around a lot of homes, and then at a certain point during that journey, they ran out of homes that could take two kids. They only had two homes that could take one kid, and so they separated us at that point.
And how long were you in the system before you went into the other system?
Oh, well, so we were in and out of foster care as kids just because what would happen is the state would come in, my parents would, get their act together, then they send us back home. And so that went on for a while. The last time that we were in there, we really didn't have much of an explanation for why we were going home. They just showed up one day and was like, "You're going home." And I knew that my parents really hadn't done much at that time to kind of straighten out and weren't in really good situations. So when we went home, my parents didn't have electricity at the house, same trailer. Neither one of them had a car, neither one of them had a license or a job or hope of a job. And we had an extension cord ran from my neighbor's house, and it was powering the kitchen refrigerator and the TV. And the
Wow.
rest of the house was lit up through like candles and flashlights.
And how
Um,
old were you?
I want to say I was either 11 or 12 when we went back. I got to do the math on the year and everything like that to figure it out exactly, but I want to say it was probably closer to 12 when we went back.
Well,
And
that's already a tough time in any child's life, the early teenage years, and you're already been through multiple, foster homes. You've seen some good parenting, some bad parenting, and then your own parenting. It must have been really a confusing time for a 12-year-old boy. Like, what the F, right?
yeah, it was, and I was a pain in the ass myself. I was a little troublemaker. I wasn't the most well behaved kid, and so um, it was confusing for a lot of reasons, one of which is I was leaning into that troublemaking world for the attention that, everybody else was getting at school just off of the clothes they had and the shoes they had, and, being in the in crowd with, fitting in. I remember back then we had the Oakley sunglasses that were like the
Yeah, yeah.
oval shape. They were like every kid had to have them. And I like had like this flea market version that had like a C on it. I remember this. But anyway, it was just, so I would act out and just be, it started like class clowning, and then class clowning kind of accelerated and elevated to a little troublemaker, the Bart Simpson of schools. But and then, when we went back to that environment, my parents were still, there were still drug dealers showing up to the house. There were still, I mean, we lived in a very bad area, so I saw a lot of that already anyway. And so I just started hanging out with the wrong people and got arrested at age 13. So not too long after going home, I got arrested for the first time. I broke into a house and stole a bike. And I got caught and arrested for that one. And then I got arrested at 14 and ended up going away for almost 2 years in juvenile facilities. So, came home from foster care at 12, and by 14, I was spending 2 years in juvenile facilities for behavioral issues.
And what's the longest you've spent in the facilities?
That actually
That
is the longest time altogether. It was just shy of 2 years. So I think it was like 22 months.
okay.
Yeah,
And
straight.
was it the last time you went to the Gray Bar Hotel?
No, no. I never heard that before, but yeah. No, it wasn't. I did when I came home from that stay though. I always bring this up just because I think it's worth mentioning. Is that's when I met Heather when I came home from that stay. And it's like the only highlight of my life at that time was when I met her. But like even her presence in my life wasn't enough to keep me out of trouble. So I got arrested again at 17. So came home almost 16, and then got arrested again at 17. And at 17, I got arrested for a robbery, and I was sentenced to 8 months as an adult. So I was 17 when I got arrested. By the time I got convicted or took a plea bargain, I got sent to adult prison. So I remember I was like fresh 18. I turned 18 March 5th, 2004, and this was like April 3rd. I showed up to the prison, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, so it was scary. Thank goodness, like my first cellmate, I'll remember, like he was probably like 6'4", like maybe like 325, like just a very large person.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in there. He had 2 life sentences
Wow.
for killing 2 people. This is my first cellmate, and I'm fresh 18. And I'm like, man, I'm so grateful that this guy was one of the nicest people out there, at least to me,
Yeah.
because if he wasn't, I don't know if there's much I could have done about it, So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for that. And then yeah, I was in and out of jail for a long time, man. I just couldn't get right. So
Well, let me ask you about Heather because I think she's an important part of your story, and I know that you credit her for basically saving your life. But not many people, even on a good relationship, meet someone at 16 that they then go on to spend the rest of their life with. And living in the neighborhood that you grew up in, you would say that she didn't actually come from the right side of the tracks either. So, what drew her to you, and more importantly, what made her stay?
yeah, it's very interesting. She didn't grow up like I did. However, I mean, she's got some traumas in her childhood that I can't relate to either. So I think we found comfort in each other, as crazy as that sounds at that time. Like we just, I don't know, man. There was just something. I think there was something about both of us that knew that the other person needed us, and we needed them. And Heather, many times I told her that she needs to get away from me because I knew the path that I was headed down, and I'm sure her parents were telling her the same thing. In fact, I know they were. I believe my parents even told her at one point to stay the heck away from me because I'm nothing but trouble. And yet there was just something in her. I always say that she saw potential in me far before I ever saw it myself. And she's not a very patient person. Like I promise you, she doesn't give too many people the benefit of the doubt. And the fact that she did with me was huge. And for me, her presence in my life has been super interesting because at an early age, she was already a far more consistent family member than I had ever seen before. At a very young age of us, in our marriage, we had lived together longer than I had lived with any of my family members in a consistent run. So it is yeah, I don't know that I can explain it, but I'm very grateful for her patience, her grace, her just resilience, and you know she's been foundational, and she's just like, she's my balance. She keeps me grounded because I'm a visionary. I have the craziest ideas sometimes, and sometimes ideas are crazy, but you think they're not crazy and you want to go out there and tell people. And I'm so glad that she stopped me from going out there with some of my ideas because we're like, what the hell is wrong with them?
Yeah, you don't want to end up in the psych ward as well as prison. How old were you when your first child was born?
So I that prison stay, my very first prison stay, the adult prison, Ariana was born. So that was in 2004. It was August of 2004. I got out, I think, in November. So she was a few months old by the time I got home.
So I know you've shown a picture of you standing in prison holding your daughter, like that's the first time you got to hold her, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, Daryl. It's funny you say this though, because I used to always, when I was speaking, I'd talk about how my daughter was born in prison. I met her in prison. And it wasn't until one day I was looking at that picture and I was live on stage and I said these words instead. And it brought me straight to tears. And I said, and what I didn't tell you guys is that Heather was pregnant when I went to jail and I left her behind to have our daughter on her own. And it was like, for me, it was like in this moment, I was like, bro, like I have always talked about meeting Ariana in prison, which was all about me and her, and it was never in consideration for the I mean, here she was at 17 years old by her. I mean, her family was there, but the father of her child wasn't. And the memories of wrapping the little baby in that little blue, white, and pink blanket, I'm absent from that memory. And that to me is what took me to tears on stage one day because I just looked at it from a different, lens. And yeah, so Ariana was born. I met her for the first time in a prison visiting room, and I was able to hold her long enough to take that picture that you guys have seen, and then I had to give her back. And you'd think like moments like that, right? It's like, man, I'm not even in control of my life enough to hold my daughter in my very first embrace with her for as long as I'd like. I'm not even controlling my life that much to be able to do something so simple, let alone try to provide and protect and all of those things that I'm supposed to do as a husband and father. And so, but it just, I was programmed at that point, and a lot of it's my fault. A lot of it's stuff that I just, convinced myself of. And I was on a downward spiral, and there was very little at that time that I think could have taken me off the course that I was on. And even Ariana's presence in my life couldn't do that for me, unfortunately.
Again, that's where I go back to the interesting part of your relationship with Heather, because 17 years old, having a baby, father in prison, most young girls are not going to stick around for the rest of that story. Like, there's no Paul Harvey moment, the rest of the story coming for most guys, right?
Right.
That's the end of the story for most guys.
Exactly.
So I applaud her fortitude to 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 plow through that and to stand by you enough. But you just said even that moment wasn't enough for you to get straight. What did it take for you to get your life turned around? Because you've done a good job since then.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to look back because, you know, you think these things are out of your control, right? You're in this life, and you're operating under the programming that you have, right? It's like this operating system that you're just bought into. So at that time of my life, I was raised in a way that was very victim mentality, right? It was just a victim mindset. Usually, if I looked at the things that had happened to me in my life, I always thought it was somebody else's fault. In fact, my parents had a very interesting way of showing me love. It was when I got in trouble in school, they would show up and they would help me find out whose fault it was, right? Like, whose fault was this? And,
Yeah.
and they would blame other people. And then I started to do the same thing because I thought that that's what was going on. And I remember simple things like pulling up next to a nice car at a stoplight. My dad would be like, "Oh man, must be nice to have a silver spoon in your mouth." Like, I just didn't think that those kind of things could happen for somebody like me. And I think the thing that I've unrooted and unpacked the most was that throughout my entire childhood as a troublemaker, I had been told that if you get into trouble and you get arrested, you are going to ruin your life. And at age 13, I get arrested for the first time. And I truly believe that there was a switch at that moment that was like, oh, I guess it's over. I guess it's
Hmm.
over.
Hmm.
So then, if it's not over now, I got arrested again a year later. And now I've been to jail. I've been to adult prison. I've got a felony. It's like, okay, if it wasn't over then, it's definitely over now. And so
Hmm.
this is the way that I was like, I remember, Daryl, there was a moment I was in the Georgetown prison, which isn't too far from Faber. And I think Dr. Vinny actually worked in that hospital and or in that prison. So I was in the Georgetown prison in the pretrial, and in those pretrial units, there's these just long, skinny windows. They're kind of like, probably about 7 foot. These skinny windows are like this big,
Hmm.
not for somebody to fit through. For some reason, the glass broke, right?
Right.
So I'm looking out this window. I'm looking just in a moment. You got a lot of time in there, right? So I'm in this moment. I'm just looking out the window, and I remember the sun was setting over the building, like right in front of us. So it was like this brick wall, barbed wire right over the top of it, the wraparound barbed wire. And I remember the sun was like setting over there, and I'm looking out that window, and I'm like, you know what? This is it. This is it. This is what my life is going to consist of. I am either going to be in prison for the rest of my life, or I'm going to be in and out of prison for the rest of my life. And either way, I just need to start being good at this. Like,
Mm.
I just need to know how to survive this and be good at this, because this is what my life will be. And I mean, that's how deeply bought in to this idea that I was. And it wasn't until in a totally separate prison stay, because up until that point, right, it's like, okay, you get arrested. I know the routines now, right? So I get arrested, I go to court, the court's going to set a bail. If I can't bail out, I'm going to have to go to a preliminary hearing, an arraignment, case reviews. And at all of these hearings, the prosecutors are going to offer me a plea bargain. And in this plea bargain, they're going to say, okay, Mr. Jones, if you plead guilty to count two, we're going to drop count one, count three, and count four. And we're going to make a recommendation to the court that you do 6 months in jail and level 2 probation or level 3 probation. I was like, oh, only 6 months? Great. I'll sign. Right. But what I wasn't paying attention to is that every single time I did that, there was that court recommendation. There was a sentence that was suspended for that court recommendation. So,
Hmm.
so for example, they might say 5 years level 5, which is prison time, suspended for 6 months with a year of level 3 to follow, level 3 probation to follow. And so, like, whatever would get me home the quickest is what I would agree to. But in that, I also knew that this is the kind of the pattern that would happen. So in my very last case, the case that was going to make or break me, right? The fourth felony conviction in a state with a habitual offender rule. And if you have a fourth felony, you can get life in prison. And by the way, that's four separate felony convictions. So if you had two convictions in the same or two felonies in the same conviction, that wouldn't count. It's four separate felony convictions. And by the age of 21, I was up for my fourth. I was very busy in the very short years
Short
between
period of time.
17 and 21. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just in and out of prison. Like, I mean, you seen the picture of Ariana when she was born, and then you seen it 3 years later when she was, she was 3 years old. And so I go in for this next court case, and I go to the court room, or the court holding cell, and the public defender comes to me, and he comes to me and he's like, "Hey, there is a plea offer on the table. I want to go over the details of it real quick with you." And I was like, "Okay, great. I know the routine." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, let's hear it." And so he's like, "Okay, if you plead guilty to count one, the court's making a recommendation that you be or making a recommendation to the court of 33 years level 5." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?" He's like, "Yeah, it's a court recommendation of 33 years prison." And I'm like, "What's the plea offer?" He said, "That is the plea offer." I said, "Sir, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Oh, nobody's gone over this with you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Listen, you are on your fourth felony conviction. You are considered a habitual offender. If you go to trial and you get found guilty of this, you're going to do life in prison." And I'm like, "What?" He said, "Oh, not to mention, every time you took a plea before, your probation had a suspended sentence. Now that you are up for this new case, you have a violation of probation where you can very likely get all that time as well." And my mind is blown, because here I am thinking I'm just going to go in there. I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing, go do a little bit of time, come home, and I'm just going to be doing this, right? And I think in that moment, it was like there was a realization for me. I was like, I mean, maybe I was questioning the idea that this was what it's supposed to be for me for the rest of my life. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. I don't know. I can't remember at this time, but I know in that moment, I was like, man, I'll tell you what, if I do get another chance at this thing called life, I am not going to mess it up. I am not going to mess it up this time. I had said that stuff to myself before. I don't know if I believed it any different at that time, but I definitely had reason to believe it a little bit more. So
Hmm.
I spent the next 7 months in jail waiting for court and praying and hoping and wishing for something less than 33 years.
Was it the first time you had actually prayed?
No, no, but I don't know if I've ever prayed so desperately. And I don't know who, I also don't know who or what at that time I was praying to. It was just there was moments in my life that I always felt like something was guiding me a little bit. I know this is going to get a little deep, but bear with me. Going back
No,
to that,
good.
yeah, going back to that, the first juvenile stay, I was gone for 2 years, and during those 2 years, Daryl, I thought it was the worst thing ever. Like, I'm looking at, like, I'm away from my friends, I'm away from the fun that I was having, the trouble that I was getting into. I'm away from all that. I'm away from the girls, like I'm away from all that stuff. And so I hated it. I hated every bit of being away. When I came home, almost all of my friends had developed their addictions during that time. My closest friends. And the track that I was on, I'd have been right there with them. So there's a lot to this. And I tend to believe that, I'm being directed, I'm being steered. And there's been some divine intervention in my life, because in that moment when I thought I was in the fire, I'm pretty sure I was actually being protected from it.
And so you are now, feeling this conviction deep in your heart. You're feeling that this is your last shot. You mean it when you say, if I get another chance, I will change. What happened in that courtroom?
Yeah. So, and the one thing that's crazy is, like, if you go to jail for a case and you still got to go to court, and you're like, you know, you got a strong case, you might be able to get out of it, or maybe you're innocent entirely. Well, then it's a lot more optimistic thinking. In this particular instance, I got caught red-handed. I had broken into a house, a residence, and we were taking studio equipment out of the house. I got caught walking out the door with equipment in my hand, and equipment loaded in the truck already that I was headed to. Pretty guilty. And so so that was the other side of this. So while I'm sitting there trying and thinking of how I can, what can be done, and praying and hoping and wishing, I'm also left with the fact that I'm also red-handed guilty.
Hmm.
So it was very daunting towards to your optimism, right? Like it's very like intimidating to any level of optimism. So I get 7 months in, I get to the final court date. By the way, all the way to that, all the court dates that I'd went to, the plea bargain never changed. It was always the same plea offer. And I was like, there's just no way, right? So we get to trial. I'm like, I'd rather go to trial and get 60 than agree to 33. Like, there's just no way I can do that. So we go to trial, and in Delaware, the way it works is they put you all the inmates get put in this holding cell, and below the courtroom, and then one after another, the public defenders will start to come and talk to you. So my public defender comes and talks to me. He says, "Hey, plea offer hasn't changed. It's the same plea offer before. It looks like we're going to start picking jury members for trial today." And I was like, okay, let's do it. And he's like, but I actually had an idea and I think it's worth a shot. Let's do it. And I was like, okay, what's the idea? Matter of fact, it doesn't matter. I'm all ears. Let's do it. Right. Because, what does it matter at this point? And so he's like, let's take 3 or 4 of you guys from the holding cell and let's put you in the courtroom and let's see if the witness can identify you. And I was like, that's a great idea, except for the fact that there's nobody in this holding cell that looks anything like me. So we go back over there. He literally picks like this Spanish guy with tattoos on his face, this other old white dude with a beard, and another white dude who also has tattoos on his face and the big like holes in his ears. I'm like, there's no chance, right? So they take us up, they put us in the jury box, and they bring this witness into the courtroom and walk him past the gate. And I'm telling you, Daryl, the whole way into the courtroom, I mean, this guy's just staring right at me, like just glued to me, right? So I'm like, dang, I don't even know if this guy knows there's anybody else in the courtroom. Like he's like looking right at me.
Right.
And he walks in front of the entire courtroom, Daryl. He looks me dead in my face and says, "The man that did this is not here in the courtroom with us today." Yeah.
What did your heart do?
Obviously it caught me by surprise, but it definitely caught the prosecutors by surprise.
You didn't chime up and go, "Are you sure?"
I don't know what was I could hear him. I couldn't hear what the attorneys were saying to him. He definitely said it loud enough so he knew that I heard him.
Mm-hmm.
And if he just said, "I'm not sure, I don't think so," maybe the prosecutor would still have a case. But he's literally said, the man that did this is not here in the courtroom today. So a lot of things happened in that moment.
And that started you on a better path.
Yeah.
I also know that you have gone on to build a pretty good business in the construction field, the roofing field. You've elevated your life from trailer house to pretty good living. You do very well now. You're also a speaker, a public speaker. You're great at your sales. But you do your sales. What's funny to me, funny, not funny, ironic. You do your sales with a lot of ethics behind it, and you're very adamant about your salespeople having those ethics. But you didn't get your sales credentials the easy way. You got your sales credentials from the street stuff you were going to prison with and selling. But when you got out, you decided that you had an interview at Walmart, even though no one told you had an interview at Walmart. Can you share that with us? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh, I thought I
There you go.
unmuted. Yeah,
There you go.
it's interesting because I that moment in court just changed everything for me. It was like in that moment, even though I was being freed from prison, I always say that the real prison I was freed from in that moment was not made of concrete and steel. I just was like, I am not going to make excuses anymore for my life. I am not going to blame other people. If it's to be, it's up to me. And I've got one shot at this because these guys ain't playing with me no more. like,
Yeah.
like there's of obvious realization. So I'm like, all right. So I come home and I was like, all right, if you're going to get something you've never got, you got to start doing things you've never done. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to dress different. Brian Tracy has a training on this, talks about your self-ideal, right? So you picture the ideal version of yourself, the way that you would see that person in the very best version of you can imagine. And in this, very preliminary version of success that I could imagine at that time. I pictured myself in a suit. I probably had like a bigger house in the background and a good job and good friends and things like that. But I noticed that this person would walk different, talk different, dress different. And I was like, look, this is where I've got to start. I've got to start with like reprogramming me and
Hmm.
understanding that I'm worth more than what I've ever allowed myself to be worth. I'm also tired of telling myself no. I keep telling myself that I can't go get a good job. I can't do this. I can't do that because of all this and because of all that. So for me, it was like I had to reset. So I said, all right, let's dress different. I asked my cousin, I said, hey, cuz, can I borrow your suit? My uncle let me sleep on his couch at his house. There was 4 bedrooms in this trailer, and I was able to sleep on the couch because all the rooms were occupied. So my cousin let me borrow his suit. Now my cousin's like 6'3" and probably like 290 range. So it's a very large suit. He's thinner now, but anyway, it's a very large suit, way bigger than I was with my little 5'8", 5'9" frame at that time. So so anyway, I put this big ass suit on and I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm not going to ask people, I'm not going to fill out this application that says, are you a felon? And then I don't get past it. It's electronic. It's a kiosk and I can't do that. So I was like, I got to talk to somebody. I feel like if I give somebody me, they're not going to walk away from me. I will show them I'm worth it. So I said, all right, first stop on my list was Walmart right here in Camden, Delaware. And I showed up to Walmart. I walked straight to the back in my suit, my big ass suit. And I walk up to the layaway section, which doesn't exist anymore, but that's where you would report if you had a job interview. So I reported back there and I said, ma'am, my name is Bobby Jones. I'm here for my 11 o'clock interview. And she's like, we don't have any interviews scheduled for today. And I was like, oh, I apologize, ma'am. But I did. I scheduled my interview for 11 o'clock. So I'll just have a seat here and I'll wait until they're ready. And that's what I did. I sat down at layaway. She's like, there's no interviews. What the hell? So she goes back, talks to a manager. Like 40 minutes later, a manager comes out, peeks around the corner, looks at me in this big ass suit, is probably thinking to himself, all right, this guy shows up in a suit for a job interview at Walmart for an entry level position. I'll at least hear him out. And I'm thankful that he did. So he pulls me back. I nailed the interview. They offered me a part-time temporary position for the seasonal period. So I didn't take that into consideration. I was being released in October. They were hiring for Christmas. They brought me on as a temporary part-time associate. And I did some other things to really stand out so that I could secure that job.
And you were in a sales position, right?
Yeah, they put me, and it was weird because I didn't really know anything about electronics at the time, but they put me in electronics.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn a lot because I had no idea about any of this stuff, especially because I've been in and out of prison. I don't even know like what's been coming out. So what was happening is at my house, my cousin, the same one who let me borrow a suit, was doing online school on the only computer in the house. And so I would wait for him to finish his schooling, and then I'd ask him if I could borrow the computer. Every night I'd come home from work, I would Google everything I could about these TVs so that any questions I was asked during the day that I couldn't answer, I will definitely not be put in that situation again. And so I was learning everything I could about these TVs. The other thing that I noticed about the TVs was that they were all like blurry and like off. They weren't running the same loops, like not very clean. Like everything just looked a little crazy back there. So I started learning more and more about these TVs, coming in each day, checking out the wiring behind it. And then one day I just got down to the point, I was like, look, I know how to fix this completely. And I had mentioned it to my department manager. He was like, no, we'll have somebody take care of it at some point. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it. So I stayed overnight. I didn't ask anybody any permission. I stayed overnight unpaid, and I rewired all the TVs and that whole back TV wall. And I cleaned them all off, had everything running the same loop. It was all running HD. It was running basic cable before. Now it's running HD. So I cleaned everything off. And the one thing that I did at this time that stuck with me long term was the mindset of abundance. Every time I learned something about these TVs, I would share it with the other associates in the department. I never kept the information to myself. I gave it to everybody. And so everybody's selling these TVs at a higher level. Now they look better, they're cleaner. It's just, they're just moving out of the store. In that Christmas season, by the end of December, you could not buy a TV from that Walmart. It was going to take 2 weeks for whatever TV you wanted to come in. We had lines at 8 o'clock at night when the trucks would come in. We had lines of people showing up for the TVs that were coming in, and it was first come first served. So I couldn't like pre-sell anything. So these people would come in and wait for that TV to come off the truck. And that's how well we were moving them out of the stores. So the store manager of the Walmart comes over to the department, is like, what is going on? Obviously, he's seeing the numbers, he's seeing these TVs, like, what is happening? We tripled our sales from the previous month and quadrupled it from the previous year. And he's like, what the hell is going on? And everybody in my department, including the department manager, was like, this freaking guy, pointing at me. And Daryl, they ended up making me a manager. 2 months after I've been released from prison, I was a manager in that store.
And um, A, you didn't have an appointment. B, you didn't take no for answer. C, you didn't wait for someone to hold your hand and show you. You showed initiative, you showed some moxie, and you went out and made your life different. And you've continued from that day making your life different. So when did you get into the construction business to start this roofing stuff?
Yeah, so it's actually a crazy story. After our youngest was born, so one of the things that was great coming into that job at Walmart, within a few months, my uncle talked to the trailer park, and they ended up renting me and Heather our very first trailer in that trailer park, and it was so cool. It was a 2 bedroom little single wide trailer, and I remember we had furnished it with like furniture that was either given to us, or I remember the couch and the love seat we grabbed from behind Rent-A-Center. It was being thrown away. And we grabbed it, put it in the house. And I remember sitting on like the little front stoop. And I said to Heather, I was like, babe, I could live here for the rest of my life with you, because this is just such a, like, it was such a thing for me. I mean, this is amazing. We just got our own house, like our own place. Like, this is
Yeah.
crazy. I never imagined. And so she looked at me dead faced, right? And she's like, yeah, this is nice and it will do for now. And to me, everybody, like when I tell that part of the story, I'm like, I wonder if people think like she was just ungrateful or something like that for the situation.
No.
But what I thought was we were just getting started. And she knew
Yeah.
that, felt that, and believed in me and believed that I could do more than that. And
Yeah.
so it was really cool. We had moved into a larger spot, and we were having our youngest daughter, Abigail. And Abby was born, and about 3 months later, I actually got fired from Walmart, and it was a
Hmm.
crazy situation. Um, I don't necessarily argue with it or disagree with it, but it was a crazy situation that led me to the next phase of my life. And at the time, like, I wasn't making a whole lot of money at Walmart, didn't have any savings, so the firing really took me off guard. And I had to sell the car that I did have at that time to pay bills. So we were down to one car, and I got a job at a place that was supposed to be a temporary job. I was like, I'll take this for now until I find a better job. And it was a job with a roofing company, going door to door, passing out flyers and setting appointments for the salespeople to come and run those appointments. And again, I thought it was going to be a temporary gig until I got back on my feet. And I did really well with it, listened to all the training. Again, just like I had with the TVs, I became really almost obsessive over knowing so much about what it was we were selling, the roofing materials, the roofing products, the warranties, everything like that. And the other thing that really became interesting to me was the process of selling to people. Now, unfortunately, that company had convinced me that we were selling the best roofing out there. Without much knowledge of anything different, I bought into that and believed that. But I learned quickly that that wasn't the case. And after being promoted into sales and breaking records and being salesman of the month over and over and over again, just learning more and more about the selling process, I started to become a little bit more aware of the end result that was actually going to the customer and how it compared to the promises I was making in the house. And I might not have had a gun in my hand, but I felt like I was robbing people.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's again, to me, that comes from your knowledge of already robbing people and what that actually felt like. Trying to turn your life around, and not even in a quote unquote um, legal fashion, not wanting to put yourself in that position again. Mentally, you had already changed and moved on from that. So when you found something that wasn't living up to what you were being told, you didn't want to go and live that lie again. So is that when you started your own business, or did you move on to another one and then jump?
Yeah, but just like many business owners, they saw failure before they saw success. And so my very first roofing business, we did start from that company. I left that company, and it's interesting because even though I was motivated by that same idea, I thought that I could better justify the end result by just being the cheaper guy. I was like, right, like if I'm the cheapest, well then, the end result's a little bit more justified. And I thought that that was I had no business, what I mean? Like I knew like hustling, but I didn't know business. I didn't know branding. I didn't know, like, when you're selling to crackheads or to, drug users, like there's no Google reviews on that, right? And
Right.
and even if you do, like who's trusting the word of a crackhead?
Yeah.
So
And it's
it's
an
like,
easy, and it's a pretty easy sale because they just want to give you your money anyway, right? There's
so I
not.
always tell people, man, when they talk about like, oh, I used to sell drugs, I could sell anything. I was like, selling drugs is the easiest thing in the world. They're going to buy it from somebody.
Right.
Matter of fact,
Right.
no, no, no. They're going to buy it from anybody.
Right.
So all it is being in position for them to buy it from you. So it's not something that's an admirable sale in the first place, right? Like when you can find, my love for sales comes from the ability to find the problem that the client doesn't even know that they have. Most of them are upset with the symptom. Faber talks about this all the time. They're upset with the symptom without having identified what the actual problem is that's causing the symptom. And that's what I love about selling, is being able to help people discover the thing. And then once you've helped them discover the thing, providing them a custom solution for that thing, right? And when you're just, I mean, again, I'm not going to, you understand what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
that's the thing, right? So when you take a homeowner, if I walk to the door and the homeowner meets me at the door and says to me, just so you know, I'm not buying a roof today, right? I always say back, I'm like, great. That means I don't have to sell a roof today. And it kind of like, it just breaks the ice a little bit. But the reality is if that person needs a roof and I can help them with their roof, well, then I also owe it to them to ask for their business. If I walk out of that house and I didn't ask them for their business, then I'm the jerk off. I'm the one that did a disservice to them, because now all I've done is open the door for somebody who's not going to take as good a care of them. So to
Mhm.
me, the whole idea of ethical selling requires the ask of the sale, So
And when did you start becoming the best? Because from what
after
I've
being the cheapest. Yeah, that first business didn't go too well, man. When you're a business operating and trying to be the cheapest, that's easy. Well, first of all, it's an easy target to hit, right? Because what you do is you just compare your prices to everybody else, right? And you're like, okay, we'll be lower. Well, there's a reason why they weren't that low. Those people couldn't
Mhm.
survive being that low, and neither can you. And
Yeah.
so our business became a revolving door. I also had a partner at the time who did some things that were very questionable. And I take responsibility because, like, as a business owner, you need to know what's going on in all parts of your business. But this was my first business. This guy had been in business before. So I didn't know that I was supposed to be watching him do his job too. And
Mhm.
so that business, I actually was able to sell my share of that business. When I left, the one of our sales manager at the time bought my share, bought me out. He became partners with my other partner, and those two ran the business. About a year later, after I left, they ended up having to close, and both of them filed bankruptcy. But I mean, I was transparent on every financial position of the company when I sold my share, and it just didn't work out for them. And I ended up, it's funny because they went in bad with one of the distributors that I work with today. And I actually paid some of that debt
Mm.
and a settlement because I wanted to do business with them, and my name was connected to that original account. So I settled it for them. I'm the only one out of all of us that gave them any money at all in reference to that account. So, but When I left there, I said, you know what? We're going to do the opposite. I read a book. The book's called The 10 Steps of High Definition Selling. It's the first book I've mentioned so far on your show, but it's a very under the radar book. It's very home improvement sales focused. However, there was one line in that book that changed my life, at least my approach and my perspective of business, the way that we do it now. And it was a sales book, and it said, if you are not selling the best, and it's talking to us from a salesman perspective, right? If you are not currently selling the very best product and service in your industry, then quit and go and work for the company that does. And the
Hmm.
whole idea is, how could you ever be confident and enthusiastic about your product if you know somebody can come behind you and offer a better one?
Yeah.
And it was like, boom, for me. I was like, I
Yeah.
never want to ever put my people in that position. I never want my people to ever be in a house making promises to a homeowner and somebody else can come behind us and offer something better. And so we just
Yeah.
we put our milestones in place and we said we're going to be the best. And by default, we're going to be the most expensive. And we're going to be proud of that. We're going to be proud of both of those.
Yeah. I've been in sales for over 40 years, and I can honestly say I have not sold anything that I don't 100% believe in, because it is a matter of ethics. And as you know, people don't buy your product, they buy you.
Yeah.
And they're not going to come after your product when it's shitty. They're going to come after you. And I don't want to be the reason why somebody is mad or has severe buyer's remorse. Buyer's remorse is normal in any sales, but to have it so bad that it's attached to your name, I've never wanted that. So I totally understand that. And when I had my graphics design company, I used to tell my clients, you can have price, quality, or service, pick two.
Yep.
Because if you're going to pick price, the quality and one of the quality or certain one of those two is going to go down, right?
Yeah.
So I was never the cheapest either, and again, proud of that because the quality and service were what they were paying for. So um, now fast forward, you're back on mute, so if you answer it, no one will hear you. But um, fast forward to where you are now. Um, You've been owner of Brightside Roofing for how many years?
So we started 10 years ago now.
So almost like a third of your life ago, right?
Yeah. Almost a fourth now.
Yeah.
It's happening quick. It's
And you just purchased recently a really super nice home with a great ass view, right? And so now when you're looking at that sunset, you're not looking at it through barbed wire. And Heather has gone into real estate, so I'm sure she's helped with some of these purchases and things. But um, have you said that line to her now? Again, I could live the rest of my life here with you. And has she
No,
said
because now
yes?
this is where she wants to live the rest of her life. I'm like, look, we got all we got all this house, and we've got a 19-year-old and a 15-year-old in March. So I'm like, this is a lot of house for us, you know. But it is a cool spot, and we've got it at such a great price point. So I don't know. We may ride it out here. Who knows? I want to go south. I got to get out of this cold, man.
Well,
We got snow on the ground today, and I'm not for it.
what life on this side of the Gray Bar Hotel has treated you a whole lot better. You
Yeah.
definitely are a shining example of you're not where you start, you're where you finish. And ultimately, something you said earlier, I think is important for everyone listening. Um, Being the victim of your life is never going to make you the victor of your life.
Mm.
You stop blaming others. Look, we all have our shit. We all came from something. We all have a hardship. And we can either wallow in that and be a victim to it, or we can rise above it and be a victor from it. And somewhere that switch went on in you, and you chose a better path than anyone could have written for you. And I'm proud to know you because I know who you are now, and what you overcame to get there. So, um, kudos to you. What does 2024 look like for Mr. Bobby Jones?
So we've got some cool stuff. Honestly, some of it, Daryl, I can't talk about yet, but I've got some cool stuff happening. Our real estate stuff's continuing to improve. I'm probably most excited about what we're doing with Unleash You Now. I mean, it's gonna be, I mean, this is gonna be something that it's just gonna impact so many people, man. When you talk about like the idea that people are programmed and stuck in their own operating system, and like the work that we're doing with Unleash You is that work, right? It's like helping people realize that they can get out of their own way. They could stop telling themselves no, right?
Hmm.
Like, and they can actually go out there. I mean, look, sometimes you are going to get a no, but let them give it to you. If you convince yourself that you're going to get the no, you're never going to get the yes. So it's like,
Right.
and that applies to everything, like everything, right? So it's like you've got to go out there and give yourself the shot that you deserve. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. Everything worth having is hard. But, that's the thing I think I'm most excited about in 2024 is just continuing to work with Faber, and that we're doing with Unleash You, and just being a part of that community has been so like fulfilling for me. Part of my why and what operates for me today, like that keeps me going, is I'm powered by the idea of giving back to a world that I once took from, right? Like I
Hmm.
spent years taking from this world in every way that I could through like even through like welfare and Medicaid and food stamps and all those things. And then you go into the robberies and the burglaries and the drug selling and all of this stuff. And then being in prison and being fed like off of everybody else's freaking dimes. Now I'm like, yo, how can I pour back into this world that's opened up so many opportunities for me? And how can I help other people do the same thing through their own growth and through their own overcoming their adversities, and perhaps be a contributor into this world as well? This is the thing that's like fueling me today is like, man, I'm like, it's almost like that idea of like when you're trapped somewhere and you find the way out, right?
Yeah.
Well, if there's anybody else trapped with you, you want to tell them like, hey, I've got it, I found it. And that's kind of the way that I look at this is like, I feel like I have a moral obligation. You've seen me, you've heard me use that so many times. I feel like I have a moral obligation through that, finding the way out to share with other people the way out. And so Unleash You's been
Let me ask you this from this point of view, because as a parent, not all of us share our stories with our children like you and I do, because we are in the public eye and we do have a platform to which we do that, being on stage and sharing our story. And I know the reactions that my kids have had to some of the stories that I've had to live through and share as well. Yours is a little different. Type of story for a lot of kids. I mean, knowing who you are today and knowing where you came from, how has that impacted your kids? Like, what have they thought, been said, or done in relation to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because my oldest does remember some of like um my wife used to tell her that we have to go see dad at work.
Mm,
So my daughter remembers going to see me at work. She
mm.
remembers seeing me in the white jumpsuit and remembers having to go through those gates. And she was there when we were living in the trailer park and through the growth that we had there. So there's a lot of it that she doesn't need to be told because she was able to see it. And excuse me, I don't know, I find it important because they have to know that there was a grind. I found a couple of years ago I was asked to speak at Connect with Chaz Wilson, who is going to be speaking at Movement Maker Live in Nashville at March. um I was on stage there. It was the first time that I got to speak in front of my family in entirety. I had spoken in front of my wife a couple of times in different settings, but this was the first time that they were all three of them were in the room. And I've watched the tape numerous times of my talk that day. And I hear my daughters, the loudest in the room, cheering for me. And so, I don't know, man. I don't think I ever second guessed it. I think I thought it was important for them to know where we came from, both Heather and I. And I mean, again, so much of Heather, like you said at the beginning of this, Heather's the real hero in this story. She really
Hmm.
truly is, man. Um, in more ways than I can ever describe, like both legally and just, there's probably things that so many things she's done that I've forgotten about at this point in our lives, that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. I guarantee you that. And so I don't know if I answered your question right, Daryl,
No,
but
yeah, you answered it perfect. I think that when our kids have a sense of what we went through to give them the life that we're giving them, and they're still cheering for us, something's going right behind the scenes. And I will say this, the gentleman in the courthouse may have um, saved your life, but Heather really changed your life and gave you the salvation of your life. And having a strong woman beside me and cheering for me, I know what that means to guys like you and I, because even though we don't stay in that victimhood, we still have a tinge of, am I really worthy of all this? And I remember Elsa coming into my office, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to, impact lives and change lives. And I'm doing all this studying and certifications and all this crap. And she just comes in and put her hand on my chest and said, everything you need is right in here. And it changed my perspective of what I'm doing. I realized that I've been doing this for 40 years, that I don't need certifications on the wall. And really, I'm training myself to run from myself instead of implementing what I've already known and given. So, without her courage to tell me that and her faith in me, it's just like Heather, for you, she saw in me what I couldn't see in myself. And um, we tell our story, and I think it's missed on some, not on us, but on some, how much of an impact our partner plays in the success of our story, you know? Um,
absolutely.
and when you can have your kids still cheering for you, um, that's a great feeling. And I know that it brought a tear to your eye thinking about it. But that's the level of impact that we have on the world around us, and I think it's a beautiful thing. So, as we come to this close, I'm going to ask you one more question that I ask everyone. And Bobby, I really appreciate your time. We could definitely go on for hours because you've got an impactful story to share. Um, but what does having a warrior spirit mean to Bobby Jones?
Oh man, I mean it's everything, especially, once you become even a tad bit aware of what you're capable of, the resilience goes along with it, right? It's like those moments where I was starting to shatter through ceilings that I had placed on myself, the obsession for how far I could go, right? Like if I would get to a certain point, Daryl, and I'd be like, huh, this whole time I thought I wasn't capable of this. And if I'm here now, does it mean that I'm also capable of that thing over there that I've convinced myself that I'm not capable of? And every part of that required, right? It required intention and it required resilience, because it doesn't matter how good of intention you have, there are going to be obstacles along your path. So a warrior spirit to me means that when you set an objective, when you set a goal, it means not reaching the goal. It means overcoming everything that is trying to stop you from reaching that goal. And that's a warrior spirit.
And sometimes that individual is us.
Yeah, for sure it is. We were just talking about
Sometimes
that
we
today.
have
I
to
was like,
overcome ourselves.
yeah, I was like, look, when you become aware of those obstacles, you're right. Most of the time it's us because we're convincing ourselves of the thing. And then sometimes we're like, okay, I told myself I'm gonna go to the gym at 8 a.m. every single day, and that's it, right? And then as soon as my phone rings at 7:55 with a problem, right? I might convince myself that it's an emergency, that I got to go handle this because I can't go to the gym. Why? Not because it's actually an emergency,
Hmm.
but because I don't want to go to the gym right now. And so
Right.
now It's going to require me being disciplined to the thing that I set out to do, knowing that that problem can wait until I'm done the gym and it will be there waiting for me, or somebody will step up and resolve it. And
Hmm.
I'm with either of those two things.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and I guess I lied, and we're going to ask you a couple more, but it's interesting to me. We are more willing to lie to ourselves as a person, as a people, than to those around us and those we care for, and that's really such a disservice that we do to ourselves. I think holding ourselves as accountable as we hold others is a huge impact on our lives. You agree?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember reading the Four Agreements for the first time, and be impeccable with your word, right? It's like if you, be tell yourself, right, the things that you need to hear, but do not lie to yourself. If you're going to tell yourself something, be sure to make sure that it is accurate information that you're telling yourself. In addition to that, when you can be impeccable with your word to the degree that you are going to be accountable for the things that you say you will do, it also means don't say you will do something you know damn well you're not going to do, right? So it's
Hmm.
like all these different levels of being impeccable with your word, and that book was my first like really full picture of that. It's kind of like, and this is a little off topic, but in the book The Go-Giver,
Hmm.
with Bob Berg, um, there's the fifth law in there that they talk about, which is the law of receptivity. And
Hmm.
everybody talks about the law of reciprocity, like you do good, you get good, right? And this law talks about the idea of receiving and allowing people to help you, right?
Hmm.
Because I was the type, I'm the guy that's like, I'm good. I got it. I'll figure it out. I got you. Unless it was like a delegation, dynamic. If somebody was offering help to me, I'm like, I got it. I got it. I got it. And not knowing that I'm breaking a cycle.
Hmm.
And the more that I say no to people who are willing and wanting and offering their help to me, the more that they may, or the less they may offer their help to someone else,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, you
So it's
rob them of that opportunity to be a giver as well.
you're right, and
Uh,
because there's a cycle of energy. There's a cycle of energy. Yeah.
the one other question that popped into my mind when you were given that answer to the warrior spirit, growing up where you grew up and the family that you grew up in, how did they handle your success now?
Oh, well, I mean, now, it's interesting. I think there was phases where like maybe it was bullshit to them, or maybe it was just another, oh, I'm sure everything's going to work out this time. It was just I was a manipulative person at that time in my life. And but today, I mean, I was just with my father yesterday, and it's funny. He's not the most, like, affectionate person or anything like that, or even wanting to have those conversations, but he tells me how proud he is, but I'm also very proud of him. He cleaned up his act. He's doing a great job with his business. He has an auto business where he, basically buys and sells cars. He does a really great job with it, and he's done really, really well for himself. And it's funny. Some days I look at all the things I have, right? And then I'll go down there and see him, and he's got a very small home, and he's got very, little, if you look on paper, like if it's a big picture, right? But to me, I always look at him, I'm like, man, you're the one that's got it all figured out, right? Like, it's just, life is just so, he's got it figured out, and he's got the autonomy of his business. He's got the simplicity and the gratitude of his happiness, and he doesn't need much, and he's one of the happiest people I know. And
That's
so,
all.
yeah. But there are people that just, are looking at it, and I've got people saying I was lucky. I was like, yeah, I was lucky. It turns out the harder I work, the luckier I got too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
luck is a self-motivating opportunity for sure.
Mhm.
Um, but again, I appreciate your time and all that you've done, and I look forward to what 2024 brings to you. If there's ever anything that I can do to help, in any of that, please reach out. We're in similar communities, and we're serving people in the ways what we do, and I'm just proud of you. Were on my top 100 of people I wanted to interview, and I'm just thankful that you took the time to do it. So
I'm grateful, man. Thank you so much for being a warrior in this, and putting this message out there for me and every other guest that's been on your show and what you're doing. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, man, and look forward to building a deeper relationship with you, Daryl, as we move forward, man, and continue to impact others. But thank you again.
Perfect. Bobby, have a blessed night, and we'll chat with you soon.
You do the same, my friend. Have a great one.